I want us to become brothers again like we used to be, and for us to find ourselves and bond with each other. Can we agree to that?
Opinions vary.
Welcome to Three Brothers Filmcast. I'm Aaron Bergstrom, and I'm here with my brothers.
Anders.
And Anton.
My last name is the same as my brother's.
And this month we're talking about The Exorcist Believer, David Gordon Green's new sequel to the 1973 original, before discussing the iconic horror series more broadly.
And here we go.
What is scarier? The devil of past traumas, or the literal devil of Judeo-Christian religious belief? David Gordon Green's The Exorcist Believer, his legacy sequel to the original William Friedkin film from 1973, seems to split the difference between the two. In Green's film, the terrors of demonic possession are explored alongside the traumas of familial loss, parental detachment, and the ordinary unknowns of existing in the modern world. The film's careful to document the ways that losing a loved one and feeling disconnected from a child can wound as deeply as the provocations of a literal demon. It's not entirely a new approach for a horror film or even an Exorcist film. William Friedkin's original film, adapted by William Peter Blatty from his own novel, examines the parallel pains of psychological distress and demonic possession. The first half explores the medical examinations of Regan McNeil, played by Linda Blair, who's experiencing troubling psychological and physical distress. Friedkin goes to painstaking lengths to show the invasive and impersonal procedural approach of the medical establishment, and the somewhat beleaguered reaction of Regan's mother, Chris McNeil, played by Ellen Burstyn. The second half of the film trades the physical and the psychological for the spiritual, showing the procedural actions of the two priests tasked with exorcising a demon from young Regan. While the film ultimately affirms the metaphysical existence of evil, it doesn't discount the psychological and physical dimensions that can torment a person under duress. Green's film attempts a similar structural approach. The first half of the film follows Leslie Odom Jr.'s photographer, Victor Fielding, and documents his increasingly distant relationship with his daughter Angela, played by Lydia Jewett. In an extended opening prologue, we see Victor lose his wife in the devastating Haitian earthquake of 2010. Jumping forward 13 years, Victor is now a single father raising a teen girl who's making more and more decisions on their own. The specter of adulthood haunts Victor in his relationship with Angela, even before her and her friend, Catherine, played by Olivia O'Neill, become the targets of a demon. In the second half, the demonic possession takes full focus, but even then, the demon targets Victor's insecurities over his family situation and the pain of losing his wife in 2010. There are trembling beds, demonic voices speaking from the mouths of adolescent girls, and plenty of crosses and incantations. Like the original, Believer confirms the reality of the spiritual world, but unlike the original, it treats it as an outgrowth of terrestrial trauma and pain. In fact, the entire possession seems to be triggered by Angela's attempts to deal with the pain of never knowing her mother, as she tries to contact her mother during a seance in the woods. The seance obviously invites unwanted spiritual attention, but it's that own lack of material happiness that provides the opening for the demon. While it's admirable for The Exorcist Believer to attempt a similar parallel exploration of modernity and the spiritual dimension as the original film, the results are far from inspiring. In ways, this seems to be exactly the film that many accused Green's Halloween requel of being. A shallow imitation of past success, with a worthless bit part for the original film's lead, uninspiring scares, including a particularly lame one at a Baptist church, and an overemphasis on trauma being the real boogeyman torturing our characters. I was thoroughly unimpressed with the film's scares and its storytelling, which ends up depicting a laughably syncretic understanding of the spiritual realm. When voodoo magic, Catholic rites, and the emotional vibes of parents are treated as equally effective responses to a demonic possession, and verbally affirmed by the main character of the original film, whose own experiences should make her know better, you know you're not on firm ground for an Exorcist film. The Exorcist Believer crumbles under the weight of its own connections to the original, and its own regurgitation of the modern dictates of the elevated horror film.
Okay, Ramblers, let's get rambling.
Good day. Hey, be home by dinner.
I love you. Good morning, Mr. Fielding.
Morning, Catherine.
And here are your daughters, Angela and Catherine. It's about 7 hours ago, and that's the last information we have.
Catherine!
Angela?
If you can hear this, we love you. Please come home.
Hey, you found her? What are you and Catherine doing out there in those woods?
You were just walking and walking. That's all I remember.
Angela, can you tell your dad how long you were gone?
A few hours.
Baby, you've been gone 3 days.
Now, I was disappointed with The Exorcist Believer, but what did you guys think? Was it scary? Was it interesting? You've both seen more of the Exorcist films than me, so was it a satisfying new entry in the series? Anders, last year you ranked the Exorcist series on our website. Now, where would you put the Exorcist Believer in that ranking?
Unfortunately, Exorcist Believer ranks in the bottom half, at least, of my ranking for sure. I was pretty, I guess, disappointed with it in that I didn't find it very scary, and a lot of the elements, some of which you identify in your opening, I think are the result of a very like undercooked script. They had some ideas that might have worked if they wanted to, but they were also kind of a little afraid to dip too far away from some of the ideas of the original. So they end up in this like weird middle ground. And that's kind of where the film is. It's like it's not particularly scary. It's, arguably a better made film than say Exorcist the Beginning, the Rennie Harlan film. And it's probably a little more interesting and coherent than Heretic, but and I'm not one of those people who buys into the idea that John Borman's Exorcist 2 Heretic is so wild that it deserves a reevaluation. I'm not in that camp, but I do agree. At least it's trying. It owns the fact that it's doing something very different than the original. So yeah, no, it's not very good.
Anton, what do you think?
I would have to agree. I was quite disappointed with it. Last October, I was quite thrilled watching David Gordon Green's trilogy of Halloween movies, particularly with the first one, but I was excited by how he sort of brought new energy to that franchise, and I just think it really worked overall, all three of them actually, especially the first one. And then, so I was quite looking forward to this. I had revisited The Exorcist and watched a couple of the sequels I'd never seen before. But I find the movie's lack of commitment to the specificity that makes the original such a great film. I just found the film like too mushy all around, and
Yeah.
it just it's sort of I think your ill-defined script. It's trying a few different things, but it's not committing to sort of doing something different enough. Say the third Halloween that David Gordon Green was doing, but at the same time, I think it fails to understand what makes the original a great film.
Exactly. I think, Aaron, you allude to it in your piece that I understand that in today's age they were, and also given the religious background of McBride and Green and the other filmmakers, I can understand why they wouldn't really necessarily want to stick with just the purely Catholic angle on it. But there's something about William Peter Blatty's specific obsessions with Catholic ritual and stuff like that. He himself was actually a believer, so he really cared about it in a lot of ways that I know Friedkin respects his material even if he's not a believer to engage in that kind of confidence. But they also didn't have the confidence to say here's an idea that would have been interesting. My idea is that I would have actually found less in violation of the spirit of the original would be okay, so Victor and his wife, they go to Haiti and they reconnect with the Haitian hoodoo root work, and it has been used by Black Christian Caribbeans and stuff like that in syncretistic ways with their faith. But I think investing all in that, and you could get some really interesting rituals and things, but you'd have to do the research, and maybe they felt uncomfortable with the Black culture or something like that, or even just going a full Baptist Southern. How would a committed Southern Baptist person approach the idea of exorcism through their window? That would be actually really, really interesting, But it's this, but they never go beyond any sort of form of Christianity. All the people who come together are sort of somewhat Christian, right, in their understanding, and so it's also at the same time kind of alienating to anyone who's they didn't bring a rabbi or an imam in to fight the demon, So it's it ends up, as you say, in this weird mushy middle place, and then it also means they spend way too much time on I see what you're saying, Aaron, talking about trauma and stuff like that, and aping that kind of elevated horror thing, but you end up with this spending way too much time on the character stuff that the movie, by the time they actually get to anything scary, is supposedly scary with the actual possessions of the girls halfway through the movie.
But I think Aaron says that, I think it's interesting, Aaron, that you're pointing out that you're seeing a more conscious structural imitation going on. So, like, I think, right, like when we rewatch the original Exorcist, it has a very delayed, like the movie takes a long time to get into conventionally scary stuff. There's a few bumps in the night early on. So I think Aaron's point that, in some sense, Green's trying to replicate that structure. But what he fails to, I think, capture is like what's the title? The Exorcist.
Who's the Exorcist?
It's not the demon, the possession,
or the mother.
The movie's highly invested in the idea of like the person whose job is to get rid of the demon. And the original movie is a movie very much about
we get two life of being Father Marin. So
the life of being a Catholic priest, right?
Yep.
Just as much as interested in this this newly newly divorced mom and actress and her daughter.
But that's because this movie a chiasmatic structure where their journey.
You're right,
meet,
though.
Right?
But like, who's the Exorcist in this one? Right?
They
like,
they could have been cheeky and called it The Exorcists. That would have been funny.
The Exorcist. Well, if this was a parody, but at times some of its efforts to tap into that sort of like the trauma theme that sort of a lot of elevated horror has, it comes across as sort of like mushy and lame and almost parodic. Like some of the lines, I was like, why is someone sort of like saying this affirmation of like belief or like, faith in like very vague terms, right? I was like, this is weird, and like that we're even sort of having this in the movie. And I also don't think it's exceptionally scary or anything. Like, I don't think the movie was like just complete garbage, but I'm pretty disappointed with it as Green's, effort to re-enter this franchise.
Yeah, and so you stick on something like the characters, like the acting, and the way that trauma is played out in it. I don't think this movie's like ham-fisted like certain elevated horror movies in the way that it uses trauma.
Is a good performance. Like,
I actually think most of the performances are pretty decent in this movie. There's nothing really wrong, even with the conception of the characters.
Only Ellen Burstyn, but she clearly doesn't want to be in the movie and is just taking like a doubly large paycheck.
Yeah, her and Linda Blair at the end are bad, but like it's just she's like 95. I don't really like she can do what she wants.
No, I don't blame her. I'm just saying like I feel like they felt like they had to bring her in because Jamie Lee Curtis did such a great job of revisiting her character in Halloween, so they sort of felt like they had to do like a lot of this is trying to duplicate what they were doing with Halloween.
But I actually feel like Jamie Lee Curtis is like more invested in like that character than Ellen Burstyn.
Yes, she is. And there's a reason Ellen Burstyn didn't do sequels until now. Mm-hmm. And she's doing it now because it's a convenient like coda for a career, right? It really is, because it's the movie that put her on the map in many ways.
Yeah, no, well, I heard she also got a lot of money and she just gave it to some sort of like grant or something that she wanted to do. She was like, fine,
yeah. See, that's cool.
Good for her.
But so on a character sense, that like I'm not super opposed to the trauma approach, because specifically when it comes to demonic possession, any stories you hear of weird happenings in people's lives who claim that there's something paranormal happening, it very often does feed on the idea of like there's something dysfunctional here, and that's like the source. Okay,
you have to
open
the door, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a crack in the wall, and it's going to come in through that crack.
And then so, it magnifies in feedback, right? Like
emotional desperation, loneliness, adolescence, which is always a thing that horror movies are playing with. Famously, the original Halloween, right? Mm-hmm. It's the idea of like that burgeoning adulthood, which is
some
terrifying.
people have argued even in the original Exorcist, actually.
Yeah, well, the age for them, her
reach puberty,
and these girls.
Right. And maybe the most effective scene in this movie is when they kind of repeat elements of the medical procedural from the original one, but they take it for very specific concerns of nowadays, which is when they do like a rape test on the girls and stuff, and like the discussion of it's gonna feel a little cold, but it's not gonna hurt, and it's like that impersonal invasion of like, we're doing this to make sure that you weren't invaded. You weren't invaded, but actually it itself is kind of this impersonal dehumanization thing. Yeah. Those scenes are pretty effective. And but it's just like,
and again, clearly imitating the manner.
Yeah.
Of the
So
original.
it's a clear structural parallel. It shows a, an intentionality on the course of the directors, even if it's not the right choice, right? But it's like it's clearly thought out. But the thing that started hitting me about halfway through the movie, when it started turning into the exorcism story more, and I was like, wow, there's a lot of time spent with these characters who I have zero sense of as people outside of the situation that they're lost a mom and lost a wife.
Yeah,
like,
and they
no
started doing
sense
that,
of them.
Even a photographer and stuff like that, it doesn't really.
They started doing that irrational, so why is Tony, the dad of Catherine? Why is he just like so angry all the time? Like there's not enough background to the character for us to understand why he's like always pissy. The only reason I thought he was pissy is because Norbert Leo Butz is like, he always plays this kind of character, but in movies, he's in Bloodline, and he was recently in Justified and City Primeval. But so it's like, I'm expecting his character to be like this, but you're like, there's no real explanation for why he's acting like this. Seemingly why, all of a sudden the dad of Angela, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden Victor is like, beating up homeless people to like find his daughter. And I was just like, this seems like a jump in like in his like character development. Like I didn't see those like
that is the kind of crazy thing.
Those like development points.
Even if the guy is extremely provocative to him,
no, but that's the other thing.
Why is he even there?
I was like, but why is he there Why is he there questioning homeless people? But then also I'm like, it's a really weird response where it's like,
because they were in the woods, Aaron.
No, I know. But if the homeless person, like in an older movie, if a character had been like, haha, maybe somebody raped her, ha, 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 like that guy would be booked immediately and thrown in jail. And there'd be like a whole sequence of being like, what do you know? Why are you talking this?
Yeah.
But in this movie, it's just left hanging as like these gross freaks.
yeah, exactly. There's actually a weird sense, actually meaner to the homeless people too. Like,
no, but it's just a very strange moment where I think it was Green and Company's like Southern Gothic coming out in this. They love that the kind of edge of society stuff, where it doesn't really fit a story of suburban people, who don't really fit the bill for like, they're not poverty stricken. They're not like these kind of people on the edges of society like you get with Corey or you get with his characters. Yeah, but so
are we? Okay, finish your thought.
No, but then I was saying the other character thing, which I think also proves the lack of follow through and the fact that this movie is unbelievably literal in its character building, is the Ann Dowd character. So the scene that is somehow clarifies that there's an actual demon at play is like, oh my goodness, I had an abortion. This demon knows that I had an abortion. I was going to be a nun. And it's like, none of this info is present with us until she literally goes to Victor and is like, I'm going to explain to you why this is important.
Yeah.
And then I'm just like,
it's not hinted at anywhere earlier with
no. In fact, she seems kind of mean
neighbor.
at first. Like they do the joke about her complaining about them not bringing the garbage in and stuff. Like the Ann Dowd character is very kind of funny to me in a lot of ways. And she gets to always be like, oh.
Well, it's just, it's playing with her in Hereditary, right? She plays literally one of the witches in it. But like, it's just another example of, it has the elements of a character build, right? But the sequence is wrong. Like, we don't know the character. We know the character is described to us after the emotional, like motivational event occurs to them, and then after the fact, we're told why we should care about it. And it's like, no, your construction is just off.
But that's how so many movies do it now.
Yes.
That's actually the logic of movies now. Like I'll tell you why you should care about this thing, and sometimes it's like this sort of ham-fisted storytelling, like you're talking about, or jumbled. Sometimes it's simply we won't even provide that. You should care about it because it's your favorite superhero, or based on a comic you've read, or your favorite toy from when you were a child,
a woman,
right?
or it's a non-white person,
or
and
it's
just
identity,
kind of political shorthand,
politics type thing. Yeah. So,
it's
but
just
that's
lazy
like
storytelling.
It is.
If this was like a if this was a 70s movie, like the original Exorcist, right? Like 50 years ago, we would have gotten a scene early on where maybe after the neighbor, right, and shouts at them about the garbage cans. Then we follow her into her house and we go see her do something, and it's kind of quiet and you kind of don't know why the character does this. And then later on it would make sense.
Like she goes and she looks at like, I don't know, some like wristband from a hospital, or her nuns.
Yeah,
or she just prays the rosary.
Yeah, and we just be like, why is this
exactly?
neighbor
That's
doing
no
that?
exact. That's
But like,
exactly
you know,
70s.
We don't even know
the
she's
first-
Catholic until the movie
No,
needs us
exactly.
to know it, and she just tells you.
So in fact, literally, the original Exorcist does this with like the Father Karras scenes.
Yes,
like
yes,
Jason Miller's
yes.
character and the developing of him as like a human who has his own life separate from the possession of Reagan, right?
His mom and stuff.
That's the whole,
yeah.
I
Which
know, but that's
is
what I
what
mean
makes
is
it
like,
all
but
so
in movies
effective.
like this, what you're pointing out is that nobody has any existence or like life of their own that doesn't tie them to this event of the movie. And that's something like when we talk about rich storytelling, there's a reason like classically like actors are like, I'm making up a story about my character and things that other, but they don't do that. Like, but there was a way, as you're gesturing to, Antoine, of doing that. There's a way to do that in a script.
That doesn't require as much time as you might think.
Exposition. It doesn't take that much time, and even a lot of like really middle brow, like, or mid-level movies from the 90s did this quite often in like really like broad family or like popular fare, but then again, they were concerned with telling stories in a way that a lot of these movies aren't.
You know that I love you, right? You know you can tell me anything. What were you and Catherine doing out there in those woods?
I wanted to talk to Mom. Sometimes I hear her voice. You light a candle. Clear your mind. You just start speaking what the Spirit says to you.
What does the Spirit say to you?
Leave me alone now.
So I think you're right that like there's some deficiencies in the storytelling and in the character construction. And I also think when we're talking about the fact that, we didn't know Anne was Catholic, right? There's a vagueness. And again, I don't know the reasoning. I don't know if it's because the movie is trying to be kind of just so mushy about faith and not be specific. But something that's so brilliant about the original film is its specificity.
Yes,
that it goes full force into this idea that if we're going to have like a priest perform this rite and this is the way to solve the problem, we're gonna embrace this world and really explore it. And that's why I'm intrigued by the whole idea that like if your angle was to sort of go in a completely different direction, do sort
Embrace
of right a Haitian voodoo type thing, then let's do that and let's focus on that world and explore it.
Yes,
or let's do like Pentecostal in the South, or let's do evangelical in the South, but like let's embrace something. Instead we get kind of just the mush, and at the same time then it also shows what I was also disappointed with was that one of my favorite things about the original film, one of my favorite things about what I think are two of the best elevated horror movies, Hereditary and Midsommar, is that they're precise and invested in their material. And this movie seems invested in being a legacy sequel to The Exorcist, but it doesn't seem like it's invested in demonic possession and how you would exorcise someone through religious rites. And that is something that the original Exorcist is very interested in. And you're like, is this movie actually interested in the specificity of how this would work? Like, because at the end, we're getting this weird kaleidoscope of like people coming in, doing their stuff, trying their things. And it's like it's
cheat at the end.
It reminds me of in Marvel.
It's totally a cheat. Yeah.
It reminds me of Marvel when you have like a baddie, the big baddie in the middle, and then like every superhero has to jump in and kind of just do their punch or whatever their thing is. And like, because I'm somewhat intrigued by this hoodoo or voodoo, right? The priestess, and you're like, but like I don't really understand what you're doing, and that we don't get a lot of scenes where she really like says like this is this and like this is how this works. Like they spend a couple moments
I would like to know more about that. I would like to know.
Well,
like
when you
how
have a
she
movie
also
called
combines
The
this
Exorcist,
kind of like root work with
that's part of what we
Christian
need.
language.
The ritual is important. You have to be specific about the ritual.
Exactly, like the drawing of the circle on the ground to contain the spirit and stuff.
But like spend more time on that, invest in that, and then so like it's just a movie that you're like, I'm not convinced that this movie, this movie really likes the original Exorcist, but I'm not convinced that this movie and the people behind it are terribly fascinated by the idea of possession.
Yeah, exactly. Aaron, I want to get your. So you gestured and said towards saying that, the end is a little bit of a cheat, right? And I'm like, oh, it's not even really clear who does
Oh
what.
yeah,
But so I want
what is
to
that again?
follow up on that
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
have a couple of things to say about how I think it is a bit of a cheat. But I was curious what your take on that was.
Well, okay, one is that they've already announced there's sequels, right? So essentially,
It
I don't
has
know,
to be a
just-
trilogy, right?
yeah, there has to be a trilogy
Because they
so
bought
it's
the rights for so much or something.
$400 million
Oh my goodness.
for the rights to The Exorcist. I'm like, sorry, that's an overpay.
Yeah,
That's wild.
We like
Oh,
The
wow.
Exorcist, but it's not J.R.R. Tolkien's Middle Earth. Like, it's not.
This is why Blumhouse is making so many movies now. Every trailer
Blumhouse
before
makes
was
a
Blumhouse
lot of
movie.
money.
I know.
Yeah, Night Swim.
I was gonna say Night Swim. I love that anti idea, but
Yeah.
of what it's about.
No, so the rights don't work in the movie. And it makes sense they don't work because honestly, I don't think you can do the Roman rite when somebody else is like saying other stuff in the midst of it. Like, it's not going to work.
So is this like, I guess my question is just that, like, finish your thought, but I'm just like, does the movie understand?
No,
that it
but
doesn't
then
work?
the movie, the demon plays the game of you have to pick one, right? Choose one. And then the dad, I choose my daughter. And the cruel irony is like, you're choosing which one goes to hell. Like, that's the joke, right?
Your voice sounds more like the Scream voice, but I like that.
Yeah, no, I'm
yeah,
doing
it
that.
sounded like you sounded like Ghostface. Ghostface.
I was trying to not.
Those go to hell.
You want? Yeah.
Oh, now I just want to see
going to
that.
hell, Sidney Prescott. Who is this? You know.
Pazuzu.
Yeah, it's Pazuzu.
Is it even
Sydney.
Pazuzu?
No, it's not. It's a different.
In the credits, it's Lamashtu.
Yeah, some like
so it's another
Greek
Mesopotamian.
One,
Yeah.
They've
Yeah.
picked
Anyway,
up on.
Aaron, so I want to hear more. So they fail, and it's only the trick of the
It is, right? It absolutely.
That's what
is
I was going to
because
say.
I think
That
so.
to me,
demon
it's like
knows
if,
it wins. It wins.
if Tony
in the end.
wasn't dumb, it might have worked too.
Yeah.
So it's actually cheap
And-
to like undo it. Like
It's just like not a great movie, but like a decent movie, and it's just interesting watching this like 2 months after watching Talk to Me, which is another possession movie, but it does a completely different tactic.
That's the one you're saying is not great but decent.
Yeah, but is
Yeah.
like super plugged into how somebody in 2023 would deal with the possession. In the movie, it's a party game. Like, it's like, hold on to this hand, say the words, you're going to get possessed for 30 seconds, and it's going to be like the wildest thing you've ever experienced. And it's like, of course it goes too far because this is how those things work. And, you know, a couple elements in this movie understand the way that spiritual powers seep into the lives, specifically of young women nowadays. She has the pendulum. That's how they do the seance.
Yeah, the reason they're going into the woods is believable. That works.
Yeah.
yeah.
And no, but the pendulum thing is like a classic TikTok trend for like, because it's all basically like witchcraft, astrology, and just like general good vibes have become kind of a thing with young women, specifically like Gen Z women, right? Because it's about like empowerment and so forth. But these people would be like, yeah, go get a pendulum, go get a thing, and like go get a Ouija board, and you're gonna just start doing this. And it's like, don't ever ask a question if you don't know what's answering. Like, don't do that. Even if you are like a complete skeptic and you think it's stupid, why would you risk it? Like, and this movie kind of understands that like that is the kind of naivety leads you down that path. So this movie, in a sense, has a clear explanation of how the demon affects, like, and
fits into our modern world too. Actually,
it's one of the striking things about the original Exorcist is the fact that it's like essentially random that Reagan gets Pazuzu. Like it really has nothing to do with her. She's just the victim, and it's an unfortunate aspect of it. But in this, it's like there's one.
I guess. Is it the Ouija board?
Yeah.
Is the vehicle?
No, it is.
But you're right. But there's not a lot of explanation before
like,
that. Anyone could have been.
But it's the Ouija. The Ouija
something,
board is a game. It's not a means of trying to fulfill some like desire, right? Like, she's not asking something.
That's not even the full reason, really.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
But what I'm saying is that, so the most interesting aspect about this movie in some respects is the way that the syncretic religious approach of the actual exorcism in the movie actually aligns with the same kind of approach that is the girls asking it into the life in the first place, where it's like, if you believe it and it's important to you, then it's real. But there's a down, and it's playing with that of being like, well, there's a downside to that, because the thing that the vibes coming back at you might not be the ones you want. It might shake your bed.
Yeah. So here's the thing then, like, is the film then contradictory, or is this actually like part of the message of the movie, that you couldn't actually perform an exorcism syncretically? And this just popped into my head, but and I guess the question would be like, let's say he makes another one. So I don't know, is he signed on to do the trilogy? I don't know. But if he makes the next one, and the next one, they're like, the characters are like, we didn't work it last time because we were all like trying different ones. We just, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I don't feel like it's actually like conscious.
Mm-hmm.
But you're like, maybe, but now I'm intrigued by the whole idea of like,
that it could
this being a movie about this was a botched exorcism because you tried a whole just bunch of stuff. And now you're going to have to go back to like the Roman writers.
So that is not the conscious, none of the way that the film's emotional storytelling plays out. Does it suggest that is the actual intended effect?
Yeah.
But
Right.
that's how I'm reading.
We're
the
supposed
movie
to
now.
take, but if you take that, you can go read against the grain. That's fine.
But I don't even think I don't even think that's really reading against the grain. I think it's there in the sense that the movie takes enough of the structural elements of the original seriously, so that it's actually, if it just followed that logically, that's. No,
I was just saying what you were saying, Aaron. That like it's actually a completely, to read against the grain is not like to insert your own thing. It's simply to provide an oppositional reading, right?
Yeah.
Whereas your suggestion is that all the elements are there to make that reading. It's just that the tone of some of the other things suggests a certain thrust, and you have.
It would be a way more interesting movie if that was the case.
Hey, where'd this come from? I found it. Where? Closet. Huh. You been playing with it? Yep. You know how? I'll show you. Wait a minute, you need two. No, you don't. I do it all the time. Oh, yeah? Well, let's both play with it. You really don't want me to play, huh?
No, I do. Captain Howdy said no.
Captain who?
Captain Howdy.
Who's Captain Howdy?
You know, I make the questions and he does the answers.
So the original movie also, like, it performs the rites, and they are like, I'm unclear entirely. Like, I rewatched it a couple of weeks ago, and I still am unclear on whether the exorcism is like wholly ineffective or just like it's just not fully effective. Because there's like the way it works, right? Like, then he comes in, and then so in some sense this movie's mirroring like aspects of that, right? So the exorcist who comes in here, right? Like the young priest gets his head broken. So then like it's not working, and then they have to regroup, and then someone, and like the choice kind of becomes the Karras, like sort of like when he's like essentially fighting the demon and just like, come into me, and then like and then jumps out the window. Because that movie also has like, you know, it is like sort of an unusual approach to how it resolves that. So is Green trying to just like do his own version of that?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, but I think that the original had an interesting, like, despite its sort of subversive element in terms of like suggesting that the exorcism doesn't really work, right? Like Marin has a heart attack, and then Karras has to like ask it in, but he's leaping out the window and like reminds me of the story of Christ throwing the demons into the pigs.
Yes,
and Legion, right?
And
Blatty called his sequel, right, Legion as well.
No, but because like, then it becomes it's actually almost like a you're faked out. You think that it's like they've lost, the good guys have lost, and then when he like invites it in, you're like, that's a bad choice. But then when you actually like from that, like if you take the parallel to the biblical story, then you're like, oh, it's actually mirroring that.
Right, but it is the dark side of it, and the nihilistic thing is that Karras has put himself in the level of like the pigs, right?
Yeah,
like he's essentially, but it maybe is like a self-sacrifice. It's
almost like,
it is a sacrifice.
yeah.
So it's a weird, like almost like almost weirdly, like, I don't want to say blasphemous, but like to say like that so the pig and the priest are the Christ kind of figure in that, like, I don't know.
But it's
There's
a
something really
sacrifice,
interesting.
right?
But that's what I love about that original movie is that.
But then you
it
have
is
the big
both
exorcist
100%
who comes in
invested
and he
like,
dies of a heart
Catholicism
attack.
and religion.
Yeah.
And it's big. It's really invested in it and deeply cares about Catholic and biblical knowledge, but at the same time, it is willing to play like nasty.
But it's all so just two thoughts on that. One is that Marin calling it into him.
Sorry, Karis.
Oh, sorry, Karis. Yeah, sorry. No, Marin dying of the heart attack is why the rite's not completed. Like he dies, and he's too old and frail to actually do it.
So the only guy they could get. But like that's also then like important.
But he has the
film in terms of Catholicism, where you're like the only guy we could dig up was this guy who like.
But it also fits into the critique of modernity that that knowledge has not been passed on.
Yes,
and the institutional, both the church and the hospital mirrored, which try to get a little bit.
So then it requires a radical
this movie is
act
much
of
more
self-sacrifice to.
But Marin is Marin's the perfect person to deal with it because he knows what he's fighting, right? Like that's the whole prologue.
Yes, countered it before.
But
Dominion.
Believer, to take it back to Believer for a second, and then maybe we can move our conversation beyond here, but to the other films. But the thing about Believer is that it ironically has a much like less skeptical look at the medical or like psychiatric system than the original movie does. The original movie is very like critical in a weird way. It's not suggesting that it's like wrong, but it suggests like there's a kind of hubris, like and the kind of failure for the systems that are supposed to support us in modernity to do so for Chris, right? And that's Chris's crisis, like, and so that's the only reason she seeks out the church is because like medicine and stuff can't. But like actually in this movie, like, well, the medicine they're like, well, we can put her in a psychiatric care, she'll be safe, she'll be. It's like they actually like
the movie
doesn't push back against it at all.
Whereas the original is basically saying
Ivan Illich would hate it.
That it's an inversion. It's saying that the modern psychiatric approach is the witch doctor approach, and you actually have to go back to the Exorcist, right? Which is actually, which a lot of people would be like, oh, that's just a witch doctor thing, is like the thing that's actually needed. Like, I mean, it's I think it's purposely trying to say like emphasize how the one is unable to deal with the situation in a way that this film. The new one does not go out of its way to emphasize. Like Aaron points out some moments where even the way they shoot it, it is trying to emphasize this sort of the overwhelming aspect of the medical investigations and procedures and stuff. But it's not cynical or skeptical of them in the same way, right? Like there's a skepticism of modernity in The Exorcist,
right?
This movie doesn't have.
From both Blatty and Friedkin.
Yes, yes, in different ways.
Reasons. Yeah.
No, and that's the thing I was going to say is that I think ultimately what makes David Gordon Green is well suited to Halloween, because Halloween is one of those movies where there's a kind of the camera is sympathetic to Michael and to the victims basically at all times in the Halloween series, like in the best ones. But they're in the John Carpenter because the camera is aligning itself with Michael, so it inherently sees him as something more than just the killer, right? He's either death or he's the victim.
Is the point of view scene,
right? But then it's also that like it's absolute like alignment with Laurie too, right? Like it's like the whole final girl thing. The movie is very invested in the emotional experiences of the characters on screen. The Exorcist is not. The Exorcist is actually it's the Friedkin thing, which is the extreme ambiguity of his depiction, which makes him well suited to material like that, but also makes him really good at procedurals, which, the first time I watched The Exorcist, I hadn't seen Sorcerer. I'd seen The French Connection, but I hadn't seen Sorcerer. I hadn't seen To Live and Die LA. I've watched those in recent years. Yeah. And then I went back and watched The Exorcist again, and I'm like, oh, and also Cruising, right?
I haven't seen that one.
And I'm like, Friedkin just has a way that his camera is like fascinated with what he's depicting. Yeah. But he makes no statements about it. Like the camera is not
To Live and Die in LA.
Yeah,
right?
That movie is
the forgery scene at the beginning when Willem Dafoe. It spends like almost felt like 5 minutes, like just showing the process of like forging a bill in the 1980s.
Yeah,
and you kind of like Dafoe's character. It's not judging. It's
exactly. That's the key thing. That's the thing. So Cruising's a very important one in understanding the
'cause I
ambiguity
know
of
I know
Friedkin, because it's
basically, yeah.
like it doesn't judge the like leather daddy sex clubs, but it also is watching with a very dispassionate eye about the idea that the appetites of the flesh could lead you to go one more to the point where you're killing somebody to get your kicks. And it's like it's weirdly fascinated with it, but it holds itself back to be like, I'm not going to align myself with anything. I'm actually not going to have any kind of moral take on what I'm depicting here. I'm literally just showing it with detail and with like a specificity, and the power of it is going to come out of the specificity of what I'm conveying. So Green doesn't do that. Green doesn't watch anything in this movie with a detached eye or a skeptical eye or an ambiguous eye, because I would say it comes closest with moments with the like the witchcraft aspects. But even that is too much steeped in emotionalism that is born up with the idea of on-screen representation, but also like, well, this is the character's defining moment in their life is losing their wife in Haiti. So everything with that moment
has to be filtered
emotional
tied
callback.
back to that.
Yeah.
Everyone is now every character is now a superhero with an origin story, right?
Yep.
The one
And it's the one thing that
scene
did it.
that determines everything.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
But then
People actually
But
yeah.
But
No,
Aaron,
it's just-
like I really
it just doesn't have ambiguity, and it's weird because by not being ambiguous about about this exorcism, about the demonic possession at the center, it actually doesn't become credible about it. Like it becomes a movie trick as opposed to like this is a real thing you have to deal with the same way you have to deal with like the brain scans or like the scars on a girl's arm. Like
that's a good point for how the original sells it. It's interesting because if you take, I was quite convinced by, I can't remember which of the Halloween trilogy has kind of the monologue about fear in like Michael and like there's a moment where Jamie Lee Curtis is like talking about like, is it in the second one how like it's sort of like the nature of evil and fear and stuff. I can't remember in which one, but like it seemed like I wasn't bothered by that like moment, and it like just sort of worked in a way that like a lot of the sort of the lines that we get near the end of this movie, and we get another explanation of what evil is, and it's really unconvincing, and it doesn't even necessarily fit with the rest of the film, and it's like almost like I'm like, if that's your takeaway for like what the meaning of the Exorcist series is, then like I'm not sure like you're getting it.
Michael Myers was the personification of evil. It's theirs. It's their wedding rings. It's up to each of us whether or not we lock the door and find our resolve, or let him inside. Let it inside. Let evil inside.
Like if you think that it's like, it was something about like, we're all born with like hope, and we lose
Chris
it.
says it, right?
And so, and we
Is Chris speaking to the with her book? Is that right?
And it's just unconvincing. And so I'm like, at the end, there's just too much. When we get a whole bunch of these kind of lines at the end, and you're like, the whole then subtitle then is like The Exorcist Believer, but you're sort of like, well, believer in what? This reminds me back to Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny.
Yes.
So like, you just gotta believe.
Believe.
It doesn't really matter in what, or like, and you're like, what?
It does, obviously, because some people believe in Nazism in Indiana Jones. So.
And I've come to believe it's not so much what you believe. It's how hard you believe it.
The line I was thinking about during this movie is From Dusk Till Dawn. If those things are from hell, then there's got to be a heaven. Like that, like
Harvey Keitel. Is it?
No, that's George
Yeah,
Clooney.
well, no, it's Clooney convincing Keitel he has to take up
you're
the
right.
cloth again. Like
Yeah.
it's like
I've always said that God can kiss my ass, but I just changed my lifetime tune about 30 minutes ago. Because I know that whatever is out there trying to get in is pure evil straight from hell. And if there is a hell, and those sons of bitches are from it, then there has got to be a heaven, Jacob. There's got to be.
And I just the idea that that's the classic horror movie thing, right? Evil is the proof of the fact that there's good. Then,
Yes.
So you have to fight for it, which is why horror, however viscerally disgusting and so forth movies can be, are the most moralistic and probably the most like religious movies that are made. This movie doesn't have that, so it's a movie with a disappointing lack of belief.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Well, it's a belief that's based on emotion.
Exactly, and it comes down.
So the movie ultimately we're saying is undone by our own era.
No, it is. It's actually a very fitting movie.
Philosophically.
It's a very
The
fitting
original
Exorcist
Exorcist
movie
is a
for
crit-
2023.
But the original Exorcist is a critique of its time, and this one
Right,
is not.
exactly. This is just shaped by its time. And I would like to see somebody maybe make a movie. Maybe that you think there is a movie that does do something like that for our time and the role of like evil and religion and stuff.
I don't admire him as much as you, Anton, but I would be very interested in Ari Aster, The Exorcist.
Yes.
He could do it, I think. I think because Hereditary proved that he believes evil is a real thing to be reckoned with in like a visceral, emotional sense that is not just something you can like kind of brush off.
Yeah.
Before we end this conversation on The Exorcist Believer, I do want to just go back to the legacy sequel aspect of it and maybe draw a couple more lines with Halloween and how much 2018 Halloween is a very good
You can cut
movie.
this if you want for a second, but an Ari Aster Exorcist would be really interesting too if you like also was willing to do like a Jewish take on.
No, exactly.
That could be really
That'd
cool.
be so
Books and stuff.
Yeah.
Because Ari Aster, though, both those movies, and again, I'm gonna have to seek out
Beau is Afraid.
Beau is Afraid, because I read a couple reviews and I was intrigued, but they're also hypercritical. Like, it's not like they're hypercritical of like our time.
Yeah, modernity.
At the same time that they're like intrigued and exploring these weird like subculture.
Midsummer is like essentially a satire of like modern relationships.
Now, or the other possibility in terms of doing a legacy Exorcist would be someone like Robert Eggers, who could do a really interesting Exorcist movie. But he would make his.
I want a historical.
He
I want
would be a historical
Ages.
one, and he
By
would have
Robert
to do
Eggers.
Historical, yeah. A historical exorcism happening in a medieval village or something.
Okay, can we have a 12th century Exorcist movie set, in a French village with Jeremy Irons as the Exorcist who's coming in?
Yes.
Yeah, he needs to be the mayor because you need someone with like the gravitas to come in.
Yeah, I'll make it. Give me the money. Give me the money, Blum. Jason Blum.
You got 400. You got to get back.
Yeah, give me 10 million. I can do it. It's like Sanj. Give me the promo. I'll do it. No, but just like, okay, Halloween compared to this, Jamie Lee Curtis is so good. I know a lot of people have really soured on Jamie Lee Curtis over the years. I didn't really like her. The fact that she won for Everything Everywhere, like whatever, it's kind of a legacy award. But like, she's good in the 2018 Halloween, and she's really committed. And the movie's really committed to the concept of Laurie Strode as a character. This movie is like Chris is like laughably bad. The elements with her
barely seems like the same character.
No, it doesn't seem like the same character. I was thinking it's more of that Ellen Burstyn's Interstellar character coming in and like talking.
Yeah, I know, because she's sort of like older and just sort of sitting in a remote place that she has to be found.
I forget which critic wrote this, but I just saw this like blurb that I kept laughing, where she's like the ultimate coastal grandma in all her white billowing robes and just seems to be perpetually windswept.
Yeah.
But like she comes in.
Is that like the Georgia coast? Did they say? Yeah.
Yeah. For some reason, the character is, despite the fact that she went through all that, is like, oh, I had got obsessed with every type of exorcism and all religions. And I realized that they're all real. And it's like, you just had a Catholic priest save your daughter from a demon. Like, how dense are you? Like you're basically proving that you took none of that seriously. But then the idea of her kind of as a almost 1980s like satanic panic like author thing, I'm like, oh, there was something there you could have like touched on, and you didn't.
Absolutely.
You didn't touch on any of it. You just used the kind of faux clips. And then the scene where she actually comes in and immediately gets her eyes stabbed with the cross, where it's a classic, like, we're going to shock you with the violence of like cross-based violence, right? Like classic exorcism.
Also, it's like,
But it's
I'm
like,
is it, but also I was saying to our friend after the movie that, I went with Jesse, who's been on a previous episode, but, and
friend
Jesse,
of the program.
Friend of the program, Jesse Hutchinson. But the way that like I'm like, oh, it's if they bring her back now, she can be this kind of like wise blind sage, like a Tiresias or something in like Greek myth. And I think Jesse's response was something along the line is like, that's giving them too much credit to know that much about like.
I'm voting for. I think Danny McBride had conceived of that scene.
And then he comes,
or maybe just his character in Righteous Gemstones. We'll have this scene.
Yeah, it'd be like an ad lib moment. It's like, what if Chris McNeil came in here and got stabbed in the eyes? What do you do with that?
Yeah.
The scene, for some reason, just the handling of it, and might prove the tonal aspects of those scenes, but or it might be indicative of the tonal aspects of those scenes. But you know the scenes in The Mummy 99 when he's stealing the guy's like body parts, and there's the one guy who's blind. It's like, I have a friend here. Where it's like Benny's like bringing him to see, and it's like, oh, who is this here? Like that's what it was reminded me of. But it's not quite as good as the guy who doesn't have the tongue.
You remember
what a great horror
Kevin
movie.
J.
Oh, man,
O'Connor.
it's so good.
I watched it at Christmas last year, and I was like, "This is just good '90s fun." Brendan Fraser.
Also, I just love that Kevin J. O'Connor is only known for two things: Benny in the Mummies movies, and then There Will Be Blood.
Okay, Benny is like,
I'm your brother from another mother.
He's such a good character, but like, what I'm saying is that in an Exorcist film, if the tonal thing you're making me think of is the Stephen Sommers Mummy, like, what are you doing?
No, I know.
No, it's just this movie would have been actually much better off if it had no connection to the old one, or if the only element was the clip and a book, but not actually Chris in it. Say, and they could reference
just
the
found
stuff.
her on YouTube and she didn't come in, right? Like you could have easily done that.
Doesn't it make you appreciate? It makes me appreciate the Halloween trilogy that Gordon Green made, but it also makes me appreciate like the new Scream movies. On like how good you can incorporate an old cast into an actual
and even do like some crazy stuff with them too.
Yeah, it's just this movie. It obviously only exists because of the legacy, but as a legacy sequel, it's just really disappointing. It's not even a movie that you can like get too worked up over. It's just like, wow, that's a not scary exorcism movie.
I think the other thing I'd say as a legacy sequel, what's worth pointing out is even though there's clear interest in imitating aspects of the original, I think, Aaron, you've done a great job talking about different structural aspects. We've talked about different individual scenes that seem to parallel. But the overall feel and atmosphere is very different. A lot of that has to do with setting. So right away, I'm already, I'm questioning just whether the setting itself is enough. But on the other hand, not every Exorcist movie takes place in Georgetown or something like that. But so I just feel like the movie, it doesn't capture the same. Early on, I could tell they were trying to. There's a few shots of like fall, like autumn, and like we're getting leaves sort of blowing down a street and like things like this, where they're trying to tap into some of those early moments. But there's something like overall just like brooding. And I don't know, partly if it's just like kind of like all these like 70s movies have so much like just brooding in them, but the movie doesn't achieve it. Two girls going into the woods, even though I think that the pendulum in like that aspect is an interesting way to invite the possession, it seems like it's already starting to touch into like a different kind of horror movie. Like, you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of other horror movies where like the kids go out into the woods and they meet something. And now there's a whole like latent mythology that I'm curious if they're going to explore in the trilogy of this, like, what was this house out there? Why is this linked with one of these demons. Like, what's going on in that water that she gets?
And you see the weird
sort of
images, right? You get those little flashes of almost like an ancient world of like demon stuff. Like it's one of the movie's most expressionistic and most actually like visually interesting in those tiny little flashes you get, which you actually also get in
a couple of the
Talk to
moments
Me.
when they're spinning around the girls when they're possessed during the exorcism scene, and you see like almost like an overlapping parallel world, right? Like of like demons like looking at them. There's just like a bunch of weird shots. Yeah.
So it would be interesting to say, because bridge the conversation into talking about, Anton, some of your experiences with the other Exorcist films. That I last year for the website, I ranked all of them. And in many ways, I think my ranking is fairly standard. But what did you think? So you watched Exorcist 3 and you watched Schrader's Dominion. Exorcist?
So like I've seen the original Exorcist a couple times before in my life, but I hadn't watched it in a number of years. I honestly was bracing myself because I've always considered the original Exorcist one of the scariest movies I had seen. I watched it again. It still was very effective for me. It didn't keep me up all night, but like I still found it like this is a movie that like works really well for me. It's the kind of movie where I feel like if I watch it again one more time recently, I might go crazy and start saying it's like one of my favorite movies of all time.
Yeah.
But
no, I can see what you mean, because it's like it's so classically made, and it fits right in with the great classic 70s movies, The Godfather, anything like that.
I love the way it's made. I love its themes. I love the way it approaches everything. And I really miss that 70s ambiguity, the ellipses that are allowed within a film where you just like don't know why this scene connects to the next. Like, why do we have 10 minutes in northern Iraq of this guy like walking around archaeological sites? Not really explained.
I love that stuff.
No way that would be in a modern movie. Like
Friedkin does that kind of stuff though. Like Sorcerer, he spends like 25 minutes like setting up the early like stories of the characters.
I have not seen Sorcerer, so it's worth checking out, even though Wages of Fear is brilliant, right?
Yeah, Wages of Fear is better. I don't agree. I think people are a little too enamored of perhaps like the Tangerine Dream score and just Roy Scheider. It's just been awesome in it. Yeah. But I still think, and it's the bridge scene is incredible in Sorcerer. It's a very good movie. But I still think Wages of Fear is like truly one of the most white knuckle movies like you'll ever watch. To Live and Die in LA also has the kind of like the prologue. It's got the prologue. Cruising's got a prologue. Like he's kind of obsessed with these things. I haven't seen a ton of the kind of 80s, 90s Friedkin movies. And then I saw obviously a few of his ones in the 2010s. Like I saw Killer Joe and stuff. But watching The Exorcist again last week, I was.
And how many times had you seen it like before?
Just once.
I can't remember. Just once. Okay.
Yeah, so this is my second time. And I'm again more interested in the Father Karras plot. I think it's quite creepy at times. I think it's one of those movies where because it is so influential and it's literally shaped every single possession movie to follow. Like every single one.
You can't put possession on screen without.
But it's also you can't put that genie back in the bottle in the sense that if you have seen any movie,
you've gotten a little bit of it.
Seen a bit of The Exorcist. Yeah. And it's it's kind of like what people say about like John Carter Mards or something, right? It's like if you've watched any sci-fi movie that's an adventure, you have a little bit of John Carter in there, and so when you actually encounter John Carter, you might not be that impressed. And I'm not saying that I'm not impressed with The Exorcist, but it's not a movie that like rattles me to my bones or anything. And I think it's like super interestingly constructed. I think it's partially that I find Chris and Reagan not particularly interesting. And that's fine because the movie has an ambiguous approach to them. It's just like, it's there. Those two characters, I'm not that invested in. I'm way more invested in Father Karras. And then the movie, it's, they always talk about, they're like, it's a really slow build. It's like, well, it's a slow build because the movie's bifurcated. You have like literally the science half and then the religion half. But once you get to the second half, like she's flipping up, she's spitting up pea soup on people, she's swearing, she's masturbating, like she's going a whole hog on like demonic possession. There's no build with it. It's just like it's immediate to that like shock factor level where I'm not saying that like the tonally doesn't work or anything. It's just the movies that have embedded themselves into my like psyche, horror films of that era and stuff. It's the ones that like they worm their way in, and it's not like actually as viscerally intense as The Exorcist, but I find it actually more like disturbing on like a long-term sense. Something like The Shining, which is one of those movies where I think might be actually scarier the more you watch it, which is a weird thing.
I agree with that.
Hello, Reagan. I'm a friend of your mother's. I'd like to help you.
You might loosen the straps, son.
I'm afraid you might hurt yourself, Reagan.
I'm not Reagan.
I see. Well, then, let's introduce ourselves. I'm Damien Karras.
And I'm the devil. Now kindly undo these straps.
If you're the devil, why not make the straps disappear?
That's much too vulgar a display of power, Karras.
You know, I think I agree with you to the sense that like I really admire The Exorcist, but my admiration for it is not necessarily that I no longer think it's the scariest movie of all time, because I actually what I really though also appreciate is it's philosophical and you know, like theological like musings. I think it is such a great critique of its era and modernity and all these sort of questions. But I think you hit on something with talking about Reagan and Chris, and I'm like, you know, part of I think you might be right, because I've now seen all the Exorcist sequels, right? The ones that kind of follow them, and I don't think it's anything on the actors or anything, are the worst ones. Like Heretic is bad. It's a bad
Is that
movie.
about Reagan?
It's about Reagan when she's a bit older. Even has some and a visibly drunk Richard Burton.
Whereas
what's the actress from One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in DS9?
Oh, Louise Fletcher. She just passed away.
Louise Fletcher,
right?
isn't it? Yeah. And then it has some smaller roles for other people, but it's a, you know, it's mostly they're the sorry, I was gonna say Father Mare appears sort of a little bit in it in a really weird cameo, but the other ones that I think are interesting. Karras shows up in Exorcist 3, right? A little bit, like it follows from his stuff, and then obviously Dominion gives us the prequel story about Marin. So I think that those ones are successful because they investigate more the Exorcist side of things, right?
Yeah.
I guess then you get George C. Scott's playing the cop character, but before
we go to the sequel ones, Anders, on the original one. So Aaron, like, do you find I mean, I guess like where do you rank? So you said that you think The Shining has more impact for you still, or gets under your skin more. I do agree in that, you know, watching The Exorcist again, it is the originator of kind of horror as like shock and just like an overwhelming bombardment of like the audience, even though it has that slow build up to that point. But like once it goes into it,
it's R-rated horror.
The point is to like just demolish the audience, right?
And it did.
Yeah.
There really hadn't been R-rated horror like that before.
Yeah, where you can just
unless it was in independent stuff, you know, like Night of the Living Dead and stuff.
Is there another older one that you're thinking of?
Like an older horror movie that it works better?
That sort of is more sort of lasting for you.
I mean, in terms of just pure scares, there's like I find Nosferatu scary. Like like, you know, there's some stuff that works on like dream logic. Something like Eyes Without a Face, I think, is like viscerally terrifying in a way that still really affects me. But you know, my favorite horror movie is Psycho. I like it for reasons beyond the horror. The Shining, I just think the formal approach is Kubrick is using the stuff that he mastered with 2001: A Space Odyssey to use it on a horror level, where he's like tapping into your subconscious approach of like how you just watch images and then
how you walk through a building.
He's essentially he is aligning the vibration of the film with your brain so that it like permeates into your psyche, and it's just very effective. The Exorcist,
I agree. I think The Shining
is the ambiguity.
Bazanian or
Bazanian, like Bazanian. What's the term?
I don't know.
Anders?
Yeah, Bazanian.
Bazanian. Yeah, no, but is it more Bazanian horror? No.
No, because it.
But like
in terms of
the takes and like trying to
it has
capture
long takes and stuff, but
to
it
capture
doesn't capture
space.
real space.
No,
Because
No, it's fake
the
space.
the whole thing is that the architecture of the building is like
Makes no sense.
insane. It can't exist.
So it's
So it has to.
capturing-
It's playing with editing and things
Yeah.
and reverse angles and stuff in order
Okay.
to disorient you. But maybe it's playing. It is like beginning from that idea of film as like spatial orientation and then flipping it around and playing.
Whereas The
But
Exorcist is more
The Exorcist
more montage. And what I mean by
Yeah.
that is that it's
the story
interested
develops
in
jumps.
like it's interested in like using editing and things like that to create the effect. Like so it's the originator of like I didn't one thing I didn't like about the new one is that I felt that like it relied too much on some of those like jump out scares and gotchas and like
Yeah.
in a way that the original
the scariest
doesn't. But
part of the movie, remember, Anton, is the snake.
yeah, like I actually jumped the most out of my seat when like the snake down in like that
Yeah.
pit, just because like I can easily get into a movie and be a sucker when like something pops out. Like, but yeah, so the original one, I'm intrigued by like its interest in trying to depict like this stuff on screen. Like there's something about like the way the movie tries to realize like an utterly unnatural, bizarre like phenomena on like cinema is interesting. And then but then also like some of the like it's like subliminal stuff which is played up more in the extended cut. But there's some strange stuff there that I find very interesting for its use of like the way it's just trying to capture that sort of stuff. I still find the movie like I just find it super compelling.
I think those are the most effective in terms of scares, like when he cuts in like 2 frames of the face of the demon into like
Yeah.
shots of Reagan's face and things like that, where you glimpse only all consciously is like something is showing up on the screen,
Yeah.
and it just like unsettles you like so much. I think with Friedkin is that his strength as a director, the ambiguity that he's so good at portraying on film, is counterintuitively makes him a little less. It provides like a clarity of filmmaking that is actually almost like too objective for horror.
I can see that. Yeah, it does become like there's not that, but that is what makes the subject matter work well in Exorcist.
It does.
There is no like you're very clear on what you're experiencing.
But this was my experience last week watching it. I was
Yeah.
like, I think this is a great 1970s drama, and it's like a milestone horror film, but I would never say it's like this is the horror film that I like hold up.
So I think that it's interesting that you point out how the movie, like once it sort of gets into the possession, it's sort of like it's just fully goes into that. And what I'm interested by is that the film builds up such a sense of dread of Reagan in her room and like characters walking up the stairs and like they're breathing out the vapor and like they know it's cold. And like as you watch the movie by that stage, once like Chris, we're no longer wondering what's going on and we've just embraced the fact that she is possessed. It builds a huge sense of like knowing dread, in the sense of like, if you go into that room that you're just going to see horrible stuff. And in that sense, the movie is like, it's actually building less on kind of like surprise and the unknown and more on like Hitchcockian like
Dread.
suspense, where you like
rather than suspense, I think it's dread.
Dread. But it's all about knowing, right?
Anticipation of a known.
Anticipation of a known thing, yeah.
Whereas suspense relies on the audience.
You're right. We don't
something
see
that the
it
characters
parallel.
don't know, right?
We're not seeing parallel. Yeah.
Right. What I mean is like that suspense requires the audience to know something the characters don't. Right. It requires dramatic irony. Whereas dread aligns us with the characters. It's like when you go in there exactly what it's not going to be dark. It's not going to be weird. You're going to see a kid do this stuff.
Yes.
You're going to see these horrible things, and you got to face it to fight it. I think that works really well in the movie. I still think it's great. I agree with you, Aaron. It's not like the one horror film that I would pick, but as you say, ironically, I think it's just a really, really great 70s drama that has a supernatural and horror element to it.
Yeah, and I always thought Roger Ebert was really good writing on The Exorcist, where he was just like, it's one of the best intimate portraits of like priests' lives on like in American cinema. Like there's not actually many movies that take like priesthood that seriously and like delve into it.
Mhm.
And then that actually becomes interesting how like, you get the like I was watching it with my wife and she's like, who's this one priest? He's just hanging out with all like the movie stars playing the piano. She's like, why is he like always around at the party? And then that guy becomes one of the early like central characters in Exorcist 3. What is the character's name?
Father Dyer.
Yeah, Dyer. Yeah, right. So
Ed Flanders, and Ed Flanders is very good also in William Peter Blatty's Ninth Configuration as well.
Okay,
and so I always want to plug that film because I think it's great.
So one of the great things about the third movie is George C. Scott and his chemistry early on in the film. Like they have a great banter. So the third one,
Kinderman and Dyer together.
To spoil the early part is just that like the cop who mentions that he's interested in going to like movies and pictures and stuff, who keeps like pestering Chris, he's like the main character in the third one, and he's like investigating, and it's interesting because essentially like a serial killer meets the Exorcist movie, and it does, I think, a very successful job of like combining kind of police procedural with so maybe Blatty was learning something from Friedkin too in terms of procedural aspects.
I do that rather well, don't you think? Well, why not, after all? I've been taught by the master.
Who is that?
The one. There is only one.
Because it was based on his novel that he wrote when the sequel that he was trying to make with Friedkin fell apart.
So they were going to work on a sequel that fell through, and then Borman came in and made the one because they had to make it.
And then Blatty wrote the novel Legion, which became a huge hit in the early '80s. Another like as a sequel book, like was one of those sequel novels in the '80s that everybody read kind of thing. And then he decided to turn it back into a screenplay for the movie, and then directed himself since he had already directed a movie before.
So two you've already mentioned, Anders, right? Like highly, like some people seem to be trying to cultivate it, but overall,
I know Martin Scorsese and Pauline Kael liked it, but they have eccentric tastes on that stuff. I think it's just so bad.
The third one is good. It's not a great movie. It's definitely worth checking out. It's not like a slumming like horror sequel. You're like, oh, it's actually definitely worth checking out, and does some interesting stuff, fleshing out some of the ideas of the earlier film.
And there's still some pretty horrible stuff, like there's that crucifixion scene of the kids.
No.
Pretty.
And the classic Shears jump scare in the hospital. It's also called Brad Dourif.
Yes,
right, who's great.
He is.
But yeah, that's the only other one.
What did you think of? Yeah, and what you haven't seen Dominion?
So then there's the two Exorcist
I watched both of them.
Yeah.
Dominion
by Schrader,
and then Exorcist: The Beginning.
And you've watched them both. I've only seen Dominion.
I watched them both, which they're a really fascinating exercise. Obviously, I like the Schrader one better. Schrader, to me, portraying Marin as one of like played by Stellan Skarsgård this time, get another Swede. Playing him as like this sort of one of God's lonely men, the sort of Schrader character,
always the same.
That he's
character.
and what's interesting is like it shows like his encounter with the demon contrasts against his earlier encounter with Nazis in the Netherlands in the Second World War, and like that he doesn't need supernatural evil. He's seen the face of evil in the Nazis and that stuff too, right? And the fact that the decision he made, he couldn't save the people, kind of thing, right? And so this like he's struggling with his own thing at the same time that he encounters Pazuzu in East Africa.
So my view of that movie is that, Aaron, like, so it's worth checking out. It's not one of Schrader's best, and I think I agree, Anders, with your points where I think you like to note that it's like it does feel like an unfinished work. It's just not polished. There's a few effects that look really, really,
and probably a few scenes that could have been reshot or re-edited or something. Yeah.
But it's disappointing as a sequel to The Exorcist if you're expecting more of the original Exorcist. And so in that sense, it's a strange, in some sense, a legacy sequel, like was, a very early kind. Like it's like, we're going back to this franchise. Like that would have been not 50 years, but this is what, 2004. So
30
years ago.
What's interesting, Anton, also though, is like Aaron originally meant like it. You're right. It's not that, but it does have little elements of sort of like adventure movie to it.
Yes,
well, like it feels like it's all set.
It's an East African adventure. It reminds me at times of Rider Haggard.
Yeah,
things like that, because they discovered
and I was going to say that
church.
This is maybe, Aaron, your mummy exorcist movie. It would be Dominion.
It's an
you would think that
movie.
then the Rennie Harlan, like they remade the entire movie with Skarsgård again, kept kind of a similar script, weirdly. But Exorcist at the Beginning is an example of how like you can take some of the same basic ideas and make a movie that's so completely different. Some of the scenes are almost the same, even though like some of the scenes with like the sort of prologue of the film set in like World War II and stuff, and the way they pace it and set it up. Because the second one, or the second remake of that, the alternate version of that that actually came out in theaters, plays like such a mid 2000s like horror movie, lots of teal and orange, lots of like bad CGI, but like also like swooping like weird things, and they definitely had like, we have to have somebody who have the Exorcist face, and so what's that? I forget the actress who's in Goldeneye, but she plays like a woman who then gets like possessed and stuff, and like it's not good, but it's exactly what you would expect from an Exorcist movie made in like 2005, and like with that kind of mid-range budget.
But to sort of tie it back to David Gordon Green, what I find interesting is that Schrader's movie is not, for me, it's not satisfying as sort of like, as an Exorcist sequel. But I find the movie, I still like it overall, and I find it very interesting, especially in its interest in like the nature of evil, and how it tries to locate that on a whole bunch of different dimensions and then explore the connections between them. And for me, you're like, David Gordon Green is trying to explore the nature of evil at times in this new one, but it's just like, it's unconvincing. It feels for me squishy and just like, simultaneously, like you're bludgeoned with it at the end with like too many things, but you're bludgeoned with pillows, right? It's just squish. And then whereas like Schrader is trying to investigate like all sorts of layers of like the relation between historical power dynamics, between colonial power, like, indigenous peoples. Like it's just, one of the problems with Dominion is that he's trying to do too much in a relatively
and then
low
the studio
budget,
also wants him to make it an adventure.
Too much relatively low budget, movie that's supposed to be a sequel, or sorry, a prequel to The Exorcist. But it is compelling for its interest in, like, essentially if you're intrigued by the first 10 minutes of the original Exorcist, of Father Merrin walking around like North Africa, and what's he doing there in an archaeological site, it has some very interesting, Northern Iraq, some really interesting stuff there. Yeah.
Look here. Look how it was done. The workers who did this were not just workers, they were artists. The mosaics came from across the world. Here, the great battle of the angels. The turquoise from Egypt, malachite from Namibia, lapis from Afghanistan.
Extraordinary.
This is St. Michael. It's his church. It's dedicated to him.
But the violence.
It's the war of heaven. God's angels fighting Satan and his legion. Cast into the underworld.
It's the sort of find that makes a career.
I thought that at first, but now it seems... There is he. Lucifer, source of light. He was called the most perfect of angels.
It will make you, Lancaster. But what will it make you?
Thanks for listening. Give us a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Three Brothers Filmcast.
Goodbye, Mr. Bond.
I bid you farewell.